Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be installing the push rod into the lock mechanism, and for that I need to build the two guide blocks that you see on the bottom rail. I'm going to be making the guide blocks out of a short length of 3/8 square bar, and I'm basically just going to be cutting a notch through the middle so that it wraps around the push rod. The first step in the process is to rough out as much material as I can by drilling through the center of the square bar. I'll be using the push rod to estimate where the holes need to be drilled. Now that I have the base of the hole roughly located, I'm going to be using a hacksaw to cut away most of that material. The opening is a little bit narrow for the file that I want to use, so I'm using a chisel with a thin cross section to take away some of the high spots so I can continue with the file. And now it's just a matter of carefully filing the sides of the opening until it fits around the push rod. Once the bulk of the material has been taken away, I rotate the piece around so it's sitting vertically in the vise. That way I can look down at the top, and it makes it a lot easier to keep the opening in the center of the block. Also, I don't need to move the piece to check the fit. I get a little further along, I realize that the guide block fits at the two ends of the push rod, but not in the middle, so I need to start working on the arm to get rid of that raised portion. If I don't correct that problem, I could wind up with a guide block that's very sloppy in areas, or worse, the push rod could jam in the lock after it's assembled. So at this point I'm using the guide block as a set of calipers. The file marks are going across the width of the push rod, and as I move it back and forth through the guide blocks, any areas that are going to catch are going to scrape across the file mark, so it makes it very easy to find the high spots. And then I basically just continue this process until the push rod travels freely along the entire length. I want the push rod to move freely through the guide blocks, but I don't want it to be rattling around. The push rod has to work through two guide blocks, and for it to work smoothly they have to be very closely lined up. So a little bit of slop is okay, because that way if the blocks tend to rivet a little bit out of square, they won't jam up on you. For this first lock, I don't mind the guide blocks being a little bit loose, because there is really no way that I can think of to test the fit without actually riveting them in place. So once they're riveted down, you want them to fit. Once I'm satisfied with the fit, I'm going to be using the file on an angle through the middle of the guide block, and this will cut off the corners and create a slightly radiused surface on the inside. This will also help if the guide blocks tend to wind up a little bit out of line when you rivet them down. The next step is to roughly saw in the tenons that I'm going to use to rivet these guide blocks to the back plate. These saw cuts are a little shallow, and I'm going to be filing the shoulders of the tenon to the proper length. I'm just using the hacksaw to remove the bulk of the material. Once the tenons are finished, I'm going to be filing the base of the opening until the shoulders of the tenon are sitting above the push rod. Once the shaping is done, I'm ready to cut it off the bar. One thing that I didn't do here, and I highly recommend it, is to file or clean up the outside edges of all the faces before you hacksaw this piece off, because once it's sawn off, it's really difficult to clamp in a vise without distorting the sides of it or just dropping it on the ground and losing it. So that's one guide block completed, and now I need to do the same thing to make the one for the other side. And you can see here what I was talking about. I now have to deal with that forging scale on this tiny little piece. It would have been a lot easier when it was still connected to the bar. So here I have the push rod riveted in place, and the guide blocks were drilled and chiseled out and installed exactly the same way I did all the other guide blocks on this lock. So I didn't bother to show that in this video. And I am now ready to do the first actual test of this mechanism. So this piece of plate represents the basic dimensions of the key. The bottom edge is the sweep of the key bit, and the part that I'm holding obviously is the bow end of the key. So by using this plate to test the lock, I can get a feel for how much pressure I need to turn the key and whether I need to make certain areas larger or if I can stand to make them a little bit smaller. But as it turns out, this makeshift key turns the mechanism very easily. So when I actually start building the actual key, I will use this to figure out the maximum dimensions that I need to work with. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.